Hello everyone, DJ Thed here. For those of you who don't know who I am an avid Pokemon fan, and I'm also a 3D animator, and I also have some experience with 3D modeling. And I want to talk about the new Pokemon games that are coming out, Sword and Shield, coming out later this year, and with the recent news that the developers, Game Freak, has claims that they will not be including every Pokemon in the new game. And they give all sorts of weird reasons as to why. And I want to talk about some of them. So I recently found out that the new Pokemon games are not going to include every Pokemon in the game. Like, they're just not going to be in the game at all. If it's not in the regional decks, they are not going to be in the game. I was so caught up in the news about Banjo-Kazooie being in Smash that I completely missed this news, and I got it like almost 2 days late. And it kind of caught me by surprise because of how well Nintendo seemed to be doing right before they started talking about Pokemon. It's just so disappointing. So let's get started on what I want to talk about today. The main thing I want to point out is what the producer said in one of the questions that he answered. And that reason was, they already have a lot of Pokemon, as said here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to zoom in a little bit. That might be better. Yeah. So in this paragraph, they have over 800 Pokemon, and they want to create them at higher fidelity. I have some concerns with that statement, because here's the thing, and here's why I had Blender open. Throughout the entire lifespan of Pokemon on the 3DS, Game Freak has developed a whole catalog of 3D models for every Pokemon that has existed up to that point in the 3DS lifespan. And those models can still be used on the Switch. In fact, they are still being used on the Switch, and I'll get into that in just a bit. What I have here is the left side model is from Let's Go Pikachu. And this is from Pokemon X and Y from the 3DS games, and it's probably the same exact model that every 3DS game uses for Pikachu. So when I first started doing research on the Nintendo Switch models and how they were different, I was expecting them to be the same. And when I found a model that was from the Switch games, I found this one that had actual graphical fidelity improvements to the model itself. So, as you can see for the mouth on the 3DS model, it is just a texture on top of a flat polygon surface, pretty much, while the Switch model has an actual mouth model attached, as well as eyes when the 3DS model only has textures for eyes. Here's the thing about that, though. This is what I at first thought when they meant improved graphical fidelity. They want to give the models improvements to how they look and not just use textures. But here's the thing. In Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, in those games, you always have a partner Pokemon, being Pikachu or Eevee. And it just so happens in this specific game, your partner Pokemon will be using the high definition model as seen here. So here's Eevee's model, and this is the same exact deal. In this cutscene, Eevee is... In this cutscene, in this very start of the game, Eevee has an actual three-dimensional mouth. It actually has depth. It is a real model. And it's not just in cutscenes. Whenever you are using your partner Pokemon in battles in Let's Go Pikachu or Eevee, depending on the version you're playing on, of course, it'll be using this high-resolution face mesh that has the actual definition to the mouth and eyes. However, here's a screenshot from the same game, but with the opponent's Pokemon. And in this case, this particular Eevee has a 2D texture for the mouth, clearly, because this mouth texture does not have depth at all, unlike the actual model as seen here. It's very different. And it's harder to tell for the eyes, but I can probably guess that this is also just a texture on the face, just like how it was in the 3DS days. And here's an example with Pikachu. Pikachu clearly has just a normal texture on his face. Let's zoom in more. this is clearly a 2D texture and not an actual 3D model with a 3D mouth bag inside. And that's because this Pikachu is the opponent's Pikachu, not your partner Pokemon Pikachu. Because this is a screenshot from Let's Go Eevee, not Let's Go Pikachu. Yeah. So that's what I first thought what they meant by that. They actually do genuinely want to improve the graphical fidelity, but it only turns out that it's only for your partner Pokemon. Every other Pokemon in Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu most likely uses just the 3DS model. Unfortunately, I can't prove it exactly. They for sure only have a flat mesh for the mouth and eyes, for sure. But there are other slight model revisions that might have changed for those models, like the cheeks actually have proper topology to form the shape of the cheek, unlike the 3DS model. And there's also some more edge loops going on. Like around here, there's a lot more definition around the neck here, where it's just not much here. Just improved deformation when it's animated. I'm not sure if those are used in the standard models that don't have the HD face, because it's kind of hard to come by the Switch models. No one's really bothered to get the models for them. But regardless, these kinds of modifications to the model aren't that hard to do. In terms of edge loops, it's all about just pressing Ctrl R in Blender and inserting some edge loops, basically. Like I can try to do an example. If I were to turn these into quads real quick, if I press Ctrl R, you can just make an edge loop, just like that. And after making the edge loop, you probably want to smooth out the shaping of it, because it's still going to be a straight line here. You just want to move it out slightly, maybe. And also do some weight painting to make sure the actual deformation of the mesh itself during animation is still good. That's all you'd have to do if you wanted to improve deformation around joints, which is what this model has done. There's more loop cuts around the shoulder area, the neck, and the legs. But other than that, the model itself is mostly the same. In terms of its fidelity, it's very, very, very similar. Only difference being is that there's a few loop cuts here and there, and I can't even confirm if that's actually a thing on the standard Pokemon models and not just your partner Pokemon model. Here's a look at the backside of the model. It's even more clear how similar they are just by looking at them side by side here. Even this weird little skinny edge flow here is present on both versions, because this model is clearly based on the 3DS model. So when they say higher fidelity, I don't think they mean the quality of the models themselves. I think they mostly mean the texture work. And as you can see in both of these models, the texture work on both of them are very different. For the 3DS model, the resolution of the textures are very low, and the outlines are very thick. It's because it's on a small screen, so they need to be very obvious with the outlines for everything on the texture itself. But for the high definition version of the texture, it's obviously higher resolution, there's less outlines, and there's more like subtle detail with the texture work. Here's the actual diffuse texture that is used for the Pikachu model. This is the high definition Switch version, and this is the 3DS version. Obviously, the 3DS version is more simplified, lower resolution, of course, while the Switch version has more details and shading applied to it. If I were to increase contrast and adjust the brightness, the detail should be very clear. Yeah, here we go. That's the kind of detail they add to the Switch version. But here's the thing. This is basically the only thing they have to do to improve the graphical fidelity of the models. Because the 3DS model, while yes, it was made for a handheld console that wasn't very powerful, the actual polygon count for the model itself is still very good and is very usable for even modern games on modern consoles that aren't handheld. Like, this is still a very excellently made model, and I wouldn't be upset if they were to reuse this model, and they are using these models again. Yes, they do have a sheer amount of Pokemon, yes, I'm aware of that. However, they still have a huge catalog of models that they can use from the 3DS games. Every single 3DS Pokemon model can meet the graphical fidelity requirements for modern games on high-definition screens. The polygon count is still fine. The only thing that is substandard about these models from the 3DS is the texture work. Everything else is very solid and is very usable today. And the producer also mentioned higher quality animations. Now look, I understand that making animations for so many Pokemon is very, very difficult. But again, just like with the models, the animations used in the previous 3DS games can still be used in the new games. They don't have to make a whole bunch of new animations for existing Pokemon that already had animations in the previous games. And here's the thing, they do reuse the animations from the 3DS games. And Let's Go, Pikachu and Eevee, as well as some of the footage that we've seen in Sword and Shield. And from the past Pokemon that we've seen that are in the game, they reuse animations. So, again, I'm not sure what they're talking about here, because the animations used in the Switch games are the same from the 3DS games. If anything, the only thing that's changed about the animation is that they've done some slight polishing work to them. And I can only think of a few Pokemon where that might be necessary. So again, most of this statement is f***ing false. In my eyes, it's just not right. I can't imagine every single Pokemon needing whole new animations for them. Because you could argue that maybe perhaps they're planning on making new animations for certain different types of actions. And doing that for 800 Pokemon might be too daunting. Perhaps. However, I don't think that's an excuse to just start deleting Pokemon. Because hold on. The only thing that they need to rework about any of these models is the text work. And for a company that possesses one of the most profitable franchises in the media in the entire world, you would think that they'd have the resources to manage textures for every Pokemon that exists. For one of the most profitable franchises in the media in the entire world. Instead, to me, it sounds like they want to cut corners. This is a lot more understandable if this was a smaller company, but no, this is Game Freak and Nintendo. Game Freak and Nintendo. They surely can't have a low amount of people working on this stuff. Pokemon is a huge thing, especially nowadays. And you're telling me that they choose now to be lazy. That's what I'm calling this. They're being lazy. You can't tell me they can't afford the workers to work on all of these new textures. Because that's all they have to do. You can't tell me they can't afford that. Because they're big. They can afford to do something like that. The only truthful justification I think Game Freak could give is that they're trying to meet a deadline for this holiday season. Maybe they can't finish all the Pokemon in time. I don't know. But given the trend lately with Nintendo games, Metroid Prime 4 and Animal Crossing, those games got delayed, and I applaud them for that. It is so important to delay your game if you can't complete it on time in a satisfactory state. Because if you release a game that is just unfinished, which Pokemon technically hasn't really ever done before, this will be the first time. If this is how it is, it's going to be disastrous for PR and the franchise itself. I know that Pokemon isn't just the video games. They also have the trading card series and other sort of products that they have to time their release windows with. But the games are very important to the franchise. And once they start getting this bad, where they start deleting Pokemon, I think it's time to delay the Pokemon release. They need to do that. They seriously need to do that. If they need to delay any other future trading card or other franchise or other products or merchandise that need to coincide with the release of the game, so be it. I think they really need to do that, because this is a really bad change for Pokemon. You can't just start deleting Pokemon, man. Pokemon has never done that before, and they just can't do that. They have all of the assets they need to pull it off. They just need to maintain those assets that they already have. That is literally all they have to do. They need to make new textures. That's it. They don't need new models. They don't need new animations. They really don't. The only thing that needs to be revised is the texture work. That is it. Now I want to go into his other half of the statement, which is even more baffling. I did say I was a 3D animator, but I'm also someone that's also familiar with the competitive scene, at least somewhat. Probably not so much recently, but I do have a history with the competitive scene of Pokemon in terms of Smogon, and I'm also somewhat familiar with VGC. Okay? So the producer mentions the balance of the battle system. So there's two halves of this statement that I can interpret. Balance of the battle system for single player. That's bullshit. Because every single player since Gen 3 has had a regional dex. And that regional dex served as the population of Pokemon that you had access to during the single player story. So that can't be the reason. Because the national dex stuff for every Pokemon game since Gen 3 has been reserved for post-game. So, then post-game stuff. And during post-game you usually do battles with people, right? And if you want to do battles with people, and you want things to be balanced, you need to come up with rule sets. Smogon and VGC are those rule sets. If you want to balance the game, you need to modify the rule sets to allow and disallow certain things. Disallow certain move combinations. Disallow certain Pokemon. I think it's a very, very, very poor choice to start deleting Pokemon to balance the game. Because are you serious? Their solution, apparently, to the power creep issue is to delete Pokemon. That's their solution. Apparently. Not new rule sets for VGC. The official VGC tournaments. Apparently. I don't understand. The only time balance of battle systems should seriously matter is in competitive scenarios, and VGC is one of those scenarios where you can do that. You can change the rule sets for the game to be more balanced and less centralized. For most serious singles battles, people use the Smogon rule sets for all their tiers. For Ubers, OU, underused, rarely used, never used, all those tiers. And those usage tiers are balanced because all the Pokemon that end up being underused and overused in the overused tier have their own tier, and it keeps stepping down. Every underused Pokemon in underused have their own tier and rarely used. So on and so on and so on. So the power creep issue isn't really a huge issue. Weaker Pokemon have their place in lower tiers. At least most of them do. And even if you do delete, even if you start deleting Pokemon to balance the game, that's not going to work. That is not going to work. Pokemon has always been very centralizing in some way around a metagame. That's just a natural thing to happen in any sort of competitive scenario, in any sort of video game. There's always going to be a metagame where things are going to be bad and things are going to be good, and there's going to be stuff that's going to be broken as fuck. Deleting Pokemon doesn't fix the issue, or at least it's a very short-sighted solution to a problem that can be addressed in a different way. Like I said, by making rule sets that can be changed throughout the game's lifespan instead of deleting Pokemon that is more permanent. So yeah, everything about this mess is just ridiculous. The reasoning behind it is all very bullshit to me. Maybe they wanted to simplify the games? Maybe they didn't want there to be so many Pokemon to choose from? Maybe? But I don't think that's justification to start getting rid of Pokemon that people love. Once you start deleting Pokemon, you're always going to make people upset. Not to mention other issues that might come, because based on what I'm understanding out of the situation, Sword and Shield is going to have their own collection of Pokemon that they have access to. And the next release of a Pokemon game, maybe like a remake to Gen 4 or something, will have their own selection of Pokemon they have access to. So that probably means that these two different games in the same generation can't fight each other because they don't have the same access to the same Pokemon. At least if that's how they plan on doing that. So the competitive community is going to have a whole lot of fun with that situation, aren't they? If that actually happens. I think the only real solution to this problem, or only two possible solutions, I should say, is to delay the game, or have a patch come out where they include the rest of the Pokemon that exist, which wouldn't be that much different from how they released the Pokemon Bank back in Gen 6. If any of you remember this, back when Gen 6 started, just came out with X and Y, you didn't have access to every Pokemon because the Pokemon Bank wasn't out yet for a few months. This would be a very similar situation. It'd be a lot more acceptable if they were to patch this in a few months later after launch, with every Pokemon ready to go. If they do either of that, maybe they can redeem themselves. I would prefer a game delay, because having the base game not have every Pokemon is a pretty huge deal. Especially if way down in the future, say the Nintendo servers go down and you can't update your game that you just bought, used. And now you don't have access to every Pokemon, even if you try to trade with people locally. So I think the best solution here is just to delay the game. They need to delay the game to fix this nightmare of an issue. So yeah, with that, I don't think I have any much more to say. I was a little bit rambly. I'll try to edit this down so it's as cohesive as possible. Hopefully it is. But I just need to get this out there. I just think this whole situation is just completely and I think they need to fix this. As a fan of Pokemon, and as someone who knows the technicalities of 3D modeling and animation, the technicalities of all the 3D development jargon, it just doesn't sound right to me that they can't do this. They have the assets. They just need to maintain those assets to today's standards. And right now, all they need to do is textures. The models can stay. The animations can stay. Anyway, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed and were enlightened, at least somewhat. Yeah, I'll see you guys later.